ongi etorriak, badakizue zergaitik eta zertara zaudete hemen, badakizue David Skalen konpainia beharrezkoa dugula beldurrezko astean. No hace falta demasiados motivos para tenerle con nosotros, pero una excusa ha sido que precisamente John ha traído la última renovación de su libro Monster Show, y es la primera vez que David la ha tenido en sus manos, la edición en castellano. Bueno, el segundo libro está ahí también. Entonces, ese es el gran motivo. Hay más libros, muchos más libros. Horrexegatik denok garelako garena, pues unos fans absolutos de los monstruos, del terror, de David, de los vampiros, y de este día, que es el 2 de noviembre, que no es el 31 de octubre, que no es el 1 de noviembre, pero quizás precisamente por ahí me gustaría, después de darte la bienvenida, preguntarte qué está pasando hoy, 2 de noviembre, a lo largo y ancho del mundo, porque para nosotros ha pasado ya Todos los Santos, y ahora aquí ha pasado la Gau Belcha, muy de nuestra tradición vasca, y ahora estamos en el Día de los Fieles Difuntos. ¿Qué está pasando ahora en México, en Nuevo México, en California?
In much of the Spanish-speaking world, today is the Day of the Dead, which comes 2 days after Halloween and 1 day after All Saints' Days. And the reason these holidays are all in the same place is hundreds of years ago, when Pope Gregory established the Gregorian calendar, part of the church's intention was to bring together pagan celebrations and Christian celebrations. And so the Feast of All Saints is right in the middle. And so they changed the calendar, and they moved Christmas, they moved many of the holidays. And so we now remember the saints at virtually the same time as we remember those who have passed. And in the pagan world, this harvest festival was the time when the separation between this world and the next was very, very thin. And it was believed that the dead could come back, many things could happen. And so even though it's not an official church holiday, it was hoped that it would get formerly pagan people interested in the Catholic holidays. And that's the long and short of it. It has long been a major celebration in Mexico, but in the United States, it's only been in the last decade or so where it is being seriously celebrated. And for a while in Mexico, they complained that their Day of the Dead was being infected by American Halloween. Now it's just the opposite, and now you see many of the costumes and decorations and trappings of the Day of the Dead incorporated into our Halloween, especially in Southern California and the Southwest United States. So I think I went on long enough there. Okay.
Quizás también le preguntaría por dos cosas. Aparte del encuentro con los muertos, de que se abran en los cielos, en los infiernos y el purgatorio para que vengan a nosotros, también tiene mucho que ver con, con la misma tierra, ¿no? Con lo que está pasando, con el solsticio. Y por otro lado también le preguntaría hasta qué punto, a pesar de que en realidad estamos celebrando la muerte, todas nuestras historias de Halloween, del Halloween si quieren comercializado, lo que están haciendo es alejar a la muerte o convertirla simplemente en un juego o en un juguete.
The English title of my book on Halloween is Death Makes a Holiday, and which more or less says what you were referring to there. The idea that you don't have to be afraid of death. It is a time to remember and celebrate those who have passed on. And this is kind of new in America, because in America, people are as afraid of death as they are of sex. Sex and death, that's what Americans are afraid of. And, but now we see more English-speaking people adopting the traditions of the Day of the Dead and the creating of the ofrenda, the altar. Some of them are online. They're not even physical things anymore. But in Los Angeles, where I live, there is a wonderful cemetery called Hollywood Forever, where many of the great movie stars are buried, and they have the major Day of the Dead celebration at this time of the year, and they can barely control the crowds. It's very, very popular, and I think something happened to Halloween during COVID. The people could not celebrate; they couldn't go out into the streets, and I think people turned inward. They thought about the meaning of the holiday. Certainly during COVID, people thought about death, and now Halloween has taken on a new flavor in the United States. It's not as completely commercialized as it was before, and there are heartfelt tributes to the dead and the celebration of their lives, and not just among Hispanic people.
Cuando estábamos preparando esta charla que compartimos con vosotros, estábamos Lourdes y Doria, David y yo, ha habido un momento increíble en donde usted ha unido Halloween con la escasez de azúcar en los Estados Unidos.
Yes. Originally, Halloween came to America from Ireland and Scotland in the 19th century. After the Great Potato Famine, the Irish especially came to North America by the millions, and they brought some of their harvest traditions and other holiday traditions, and one of them was Halloween. And it took root in America slowly, and it was mixed in with other celebrations. The jack-o'-lantern, the carved pumpkin, in North America was originally associated with Thanksgiving, another autumn harvest festival, but only gradually became drawn into the Halloween traditions. But during the Great Depression, the Irish and Scottish rural customs of pranks and practical jokes, they were one thing in the countryside in Ireland and Scotland. In urban America, they got darker and were not as well tolerated. Some of the pranks were very dangerous. I mean, throwing scarecrows in front of oncoming locomotives, arson, vandalism. And so the tradition of trick or treat was begun. Civic organizations, schools, churches, all encouraged celebrations where homeowners would buy off the children with a treat, so they would not perform a trick. Today, American children have no idea what the trick part of trick or treat was all about. It tends to be all about the candy. But during World War II, sugar was rationed, and all the Halloween traditions kind of went dormant for a while, kind of like in COVID today. But after the war, the major candy companies and Walt Disney began to merchandise costumes of its characters for Halloween. And in the 1950s, children all over the United States were taught by the candy companies and by Walt Disney how to celebrate Halloween. And that has been the template ever since. And it has been growing and growing. It is the biggest retail holiday outside of Christmas in America, and has been for quite a while. And it's always evolving. There are new traditions, but the core of it remains the same. And I think that it is a particularly American holiday in that as Americans, we're told that we can be or become whoever we want, that there are no limits. And Halloween is the one holiday where we really get the chance. And I think that's why so many Americans revel in it. The possibility of change is our birthright, at least we think so. And we get to really act it out. Other holidays are days of obligations to the family, Christmas and Thanksgiving, and having to put up with the relatives and uncomfortable dinner parties. And but on Halloween, no, it's just letting loose. And most Americans, I think, will tell you when you ask what is your favorite holiday, they will say Halloween.
El cine que todos y todas las que estamos aquí amamos nos ha enseñado que en Halloween los asesinos andan sueltos, y no solo Michael Myers, muchos más. Que Halloween es maravillosamente peligroso, pero en muchos de tus libros aparece que en el fondo la gente, aparte de que sabemos de que podemos matar en cualquier momento, en Halloween no ha habido tantas tragedias, exceptuando la de aquel padre que envenenó a su hijo, más o menos.
Yes, there are only a handful of actual incidents where there was a father in Texas who took advantage of all of the urban legends about Halloween and actually poisoned his son to collect insurance money and blame it on, the Halloween boogeyman. And there was also an incident where the painkiller Tylenol in Chicago was poisoned. Cyanide was put into the capsules, and they never found out who did that. And that happened very close to Halloween. And those two things just spread like wildfire. But in actuality, Halloween's no more dangerous than any other day of the year. And the only extra danger that comes with Halloween is the fact that children are out at night. They're wearing costumes and masks which inhibit their vision, and there is an uptake in traffic accidents at Halloween, but no serial killers. And I think it's because this is how parents celebrate Halloween. They like to scare themselves. And the children know their parents like to scare themselves, and very often come back with stories that feed into their parents' worst fears, fears that they really enjoy.
No sé si podemos dar un salto tan tremendo, ustedes y vosotros lo diréis, pero de Halloween a la gran serie de películas en las que la gente realmente sí puede matar y nunca va a ser castigada, la serie de películas La Purga. ¿Qué conexión ves tú, David, incluso con ritos del medievo?
Yes. The Purge is a very interesting movie franchise, very disturbing, and it is not specifically about Halloween, but has a lot to do with the idea of Halloween. In The Purge, on one night of the year in a transformed United States, people are allowed to, all laws are suspended for one day so that people can blow off steam, the way they do at Halloween and at Festival and have at many other festivals, going back to the medieval Feast of Fools, where you weren't allowed to kill people, but you were not punished for transgressions, and commoners could become kings, and kings could act like commoners, and it was a topsy-turvy kind of a world. The Purge has a lot to do with current American politics, and it may be a little too close to home. I find them fascinating, but a little uncomfortable to sit through. But they are making some brilliant observations about American politics.
Cuando, aunque sospechemos que no sospechemos y deseemos que no sea verdad, cuando vimos el año pasado la última película de la serie Halloween, nos sentimos, quizás algunas y algunos, un poco huérfanos. ¿Y ahora qué? ¿Qué vamos a hacer? ¿Cómo vamos a celebrar cada 31 de octubre, cada 1 de octubre, cada 2 de noviembre? No sé si de repente apareció otra película que a mí personalmente, luego podemos discutir, me pareció interesante, Back Phone, porque creaba, yo creo que el comienzo de una nueva saga, un secuestrador de niños, un niño muerto, otro en el Zulo, y por medio de un teléfono oficialmente desconectado, el niño muerto va comentándole o ayudando al chaval todavía vivo a poder librarse de su secuestrador. Esta pregunta sería, ¿hay nuevos personajes del horror? ¿Son reinterpretaciones como tu libro? ¿Son renovaciones puestas al día de viejos mitos? Megan, la muñeca de inteligencia artificial, es en el fondo la novia de Chucky renovada.
Horror movies are a remarkable film category because it's almost impossible to lose money, and it's possible to make a great deal of money. with the horror genre. And that's why I don't think we've seen the end of the Halloween franchise. Halloween has to pretend to die so it can come back, like other other things at Halloween. And but usually in October in the United States, there are a number of franchises, horror franchises, that tend to come back. One is the more recent series about The Nun. And the second one has just come out, and it's gotten very good reviews. And I'm sure we're going to see 3 and 4 and however many others. But it is October is a very good time for the movie studios to make money. And during COVID, it was a very bad time for American movie distribution. The studios were losing a great deal of money, but horror movies were still very reliable. And all during COVID, even if they went directly to streaming on cable and online, horror movies were very popular. It's and this has always been the way. The fantastic and the frightening and the bizarre were part of cinema from the very beginning. The earliest trick films of in France of Georges Méliès, you can see the seeds of all the later movie monsters and things that frighten us, ghosts and bat-winged demons and everything. In America, this tradition was not picked up originally. In the silent era in America, there were terrifying characters, but there were no supernatural monsters. It was believed the public is too practical here. We are too materialistic. We don't believe in these things. If there is a ghost, it has to be explained away, as a criminal conspiracy, a plot to steal an inheritance, or something like that. But it was only with Universal Pictures, with Dracula and Frankenstein in 1931, that Hollywood took a chance on completely fantastic premises. And they really did feel like they were taking a chance. They also felt like they didn't have anything to lose, because Hollywood was on the verge of bankruptcy. And Dracula and Frankenstein saved Universal Pictures from bankruptcy. Think of how different Hollywood history would be if that studio and everything it inspired and all of the filmmakers who grew up on those fantastic films had not existed. It would be a very different place today. So the horror genre, even though it wasn't taken as seriously, it was minimized by the critics, it had an outsized impact on the history of Hollywood in general. And I'm glad that in more recent years, these films are getting their due. They're a very important part of American popular culture.
Déjeme que insista. Los monstruos, amados por todos nosotros, se renuevan, pero siguen siendo los mismos, se entrecruzan entre ellos, comparten características, se las roban, se las quitan los unos a los otros, se las añadan. Por eso preguntaba yo, los que pensamos, los monstruos, las criaturas que pensamos que son nuevas, son en realidad magníficas reediciones ampliadas y puestas al día como sus libros.
Yes, the people are always asking me, well, what what can we see in the future? What are the new kind of monsters we're going to have? And we're not going to see any new monsters. We're going to revisit the old ones. There tend to be about four. There is the monster of superstition, the thing that returns from the grave, like Dracula. There is the monster of science, Frankenstein. There is the freak, the physically anomalous monster who challenges our sense of what the human form is really all about. And then the two-faced monster, the doppelganger, the werewolf, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And this is about all you need, and you can recombine the elements, and it kind of goes on forever. People ask me, well, what about artificial intelligence and cyborgs and automatons? And well, no, this is all, this is science again. This is an extension of the Frankenstein myth, just taking on new aspects. And so this is what archetypes are about. They don't really change. They adapt. They develop. They evolve. And that's why they last as long as they do, because they change with the time. And every generation has its new favorite monsters, but they draw upon the past, always.
Tenemos bueno, los dos grandes puntos que también nos han reunido aquí. Ha citado usted la palabra que todos amamos, la original, freaks, y ha citado a Drácula. El comienzo de Monster Show, el libro, es magnífico, uniendo Freaks, la película, con la gran fotógrafo Diana Bush. Simplemente me gustaría que nos hablase de Freaks desde su punto de vista, del de su amor, del de la importancia que tiene en la historia del cine fantástico y de terror, y me gustaría saber cómo llegó a esa unión magnífica de Diana Bush y Freaks.
Okay. Yes, Arbus and Freaks and Todd Browning and Dracula are all connected in my mind. Not in everybody's mind, but I put them together in the Monster Show. I got interested in monsters in the 1960s, and there was a whole generation of us. We like to call ourselves monster kids, and the classic horror movies were being shown on television for the first time. And there were magazines and fan clubs, and many of us made our own 8mm versions of Dracula and Frankenstein in the backyard and the basement, and we assembled model kits. And it was a way of binding together. You couldn't, there was no video on demand. There was no home video. There was no way to really see these films whenever you wanted. But you could have the magazines. You could have pen pals to communicate with. You could make your own versions of what you thought these movies might be like if you ever could see them. So Monsters detonated a lot of creativity. And many of us have had interesting, careers in communications and the performing arts. Some of us turned out to be Steven Spielberg and Stephen King. Not all of us, unfortunately, but the Monsters had a really, really big impact. And in the 60s were a time of great upheaval. Sometimes today people think of it as, the 60s, that was mid-century modern design and furniture and nostalgic television. But no, it was politically a very a frightening time in America. It was very transgressive, and there's an intersection between monsters and transgressive artists. One of them was the photographer Diane Arbus, who was fascinated by the movies of Todd Browning. One of the first things she did when Dracula was shown on television, she took pictures of the television screen with Bela Lugosi, staring out at you. And these are now very, very valuable, photographs in museum collections. And she did the same thing with Freaks, which wasn't shown on television. It was Todd Browning's film after he made Dracula. And MGM wanted him to make an even more frightening film. And Browning drew on his own background in carnivals and circuses and made a film that people just found too horrible because it didn't have frightening makeup and masks. It had actual disabled and disfigured and malformed circus performers in it, who at the very end become absolutely terrifying. He brings you in, he makes them seem normal and just like you and me, and then at the very end, they take their revenge on the characters who have wronged them. And it basically was the beginning of the end of Todd Browning's career. It's about the only film that MGM withdrew from circulation, and it wasn't shown anywhere for almost 30 years, and was banned in countries around the world. And people have been fascinated by it, and it started coming back in the 1960s, along with Arbus and her fascination with grotesque human forms and circus freaks and things that you were not supposed to, that people in polite society were not supposed to be interested in or want to see anymore. There was a time back in the days of Todd Browning where freak shows were just another part of popular culture. And then people who thought they were doing good put these performers out of business, literally, by treating them as exploited. They didn't feel that way. They were very proud that they were people with, disabilities that would stop other people cold were able to go on and have gainful careers. And they were very proud of their difference. And by the mid-20th century, this had all kind of gone away. Arbus was one of the people who came back and started looking at it again. And so I started the Monster Show with Diane Arbus watching Freaks and how it played into monsters in generally. The Monster Show was originally one of the alternate titles for Todd Browning's Freaks when it went underground and could only be seen on the exploitation circuit. I thought that's what my second book was going to. Hollywood Gothic was my first book on monsters, and then this followed. I thought this was all going to be about freaks, but it wasn't. It was much bigger than that. But I've come back to it now. In the States, the Criterion Collection, really one of the best home video people, have put together a new restored version of Freaks and other Todd Browning films. And I just acted as their consulting producer on it. So I'm still dancing around with Freaks all these years later. I just can't seem to. But there's always something new to tell about it. It's amazing the things that show up. And my Todd Browning biography is coming out in a new edition next year. And for a while, I thought people wouldn't remember these old films or really care about them. And many of my students, when I've taught courses on these films, are too young to remember them, who have never seen a black and white movie, and they seem more interested than anyone I've met before or since. So monsters have a way of renewing themselves and renewing interest in themselves. And I think they're going to last, a lot longer than I'm going to last. But I'm glad I've been able to play a part in keeping this interest alive.
Y en esos alumnos que lógicamente por la edad que tienen todavía no habían visto ninguna película en blanco y negro, ni habían visto el Drácula de Coppola, encuentra una nueva forma de entender, amar o temer al monstruo. Le quiero decir, los que ya sí hemos visto y casi hemos empezado a ver cine en blanco y negro, empezamos temiendo al monstruo, temiendo a la criatura de Frankenstein, temiendo al vampiro, temiendo a los seres, a los freaks de la película de Browning, y ahora temiendo a la criatura del lago negro, de la laguna negra, y ahora de alguna manera siempre nos ponemos a su favor. Nadie quiere que Frankenstein sea masacrado por la multitud. Siempre piensas que el vampiro, sabemos que siempre resucita, pero ese cambio de sentimientos hacia el monstruo, hacia la criatura.
Yes, although in the old days, some of the monsters were sympathetic. Boris Karloff, as the Frankenstein monster, was an extremely sympathetic character, misunderstood. Others, like Dracula, were pure evil, and you ought to be afraid of them. But that element of pathos was always very important. I think my students in the last 10 years or so they're not frightened by these old movies, but they're fascinated by them. And they are more, before I wrote The Monster Show, people never thought much about that these movies said anything about the bigger world. I think that horror movies in the 20th century were a kind of secret history of modern times, and that every big disruptive or traumatic event in our culture, be they world wars or economic depressions or pandemics, the AIDS epidemic, for instance, the sexual revolution, all of these things set in motion identifiable patterns in what we like to be scared at the movies. And I didn't set out to write that book. I discovered it as I began doing my research. I went back to the 1960s and just remembered how much I loved monsters. I didn't ask many questions about why, but I went back to my earliest memories that had to do with the plastic model kits and the magazines and all the things that I found so fascinating. And when I went back and looked at the newspapers from those times, I suddenly remembered, I wasn't frightened of monsters. I was frightened of the Cold War and the threat of atomic war and the Cuban Missile Crisis. That scared the hell out of me. And I had buried it and transferred all of my fears about death, basically, to movie monsters, who were beings that generally could not die. And that just kind of blew me away. I thought, really? And my editor at my American publisher said, yeah, go look at some of these other decades and see what else you can find. And there it was. It just happened over and over and over. So I think that my students today are much more open to the idea that monsters may mean something larger, that they're not simple escapist entertainment. Hollywood treated them that way to begin with. Hollywood wasn't trying to make any statement. The original horror movies in Europe, like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Nosferatu, they were deliberate cultural critiques. They were anti-war statements. They both came after World War I, the horrors of World War I, and they each in their own way were making serious points about it. America just saw the surface and said, oh, monster movies, let's do something like that, without the same motivation. But that connection was always there, and that's what I've been exploring in my books ever since.
Ha venido a nosotros, usted, David, porque, bueno, porque lógicamente porque le necesitábamos y le apreciamos, pero también es verdad que después se irá a Madrid dentro de la gira presentando la nueva edición de Monster Show, un larguísimo viaje, ha dormido 12 horas, por eso está en esta plena forma. En Madrid su presentación estará envuelta con la proyección de Drácula, pero en la Spanish version, la versión de Melford, que usted adora especialmente, defiende con mucha fuerza y que además nos haría pensar incluso en Lupita Tobar, que es una de nuestras criaturas también favoritas.
Yes, I was very fortunate to get to become friends with Lupita Tovar. When I was fascinated by the idea that Hollywood made separate foreign language versions of a lot of its movies in the days of the early talkies, because so much of the revenue from Hollywood came from overseas. So before subtitles and dubbing and all of that, the excitement of talking movies was to hear actors speak in their natural voices. So the only way to really do this quickly and effectively at the beginning of the talking era was to make simultaneous versions of the American pictures in foreign languages. Some were in German, some were in French. Most of them were in Spanish, because that was the largest number of countries for exports. And the Spanish version of Dracula turned out to be one of the most elaborate, and there's a wonderful backstory about it that I wrote about in Hollywood Gótico. And it's a love story involving Lupita Tovar, who was a Mexican ingenue who came to Hollywood and thought her career was over because of the talkies. She, at that time, could barely understand English and thought she had to go back to Mexico. But the man who was producing the film had fallen in love with her and decided to use the Spanish Dracula as bait to keep her in Hollywood long enough to propose and marry her, and that's exactly what happened. And the film was thought to be lost because Hollywood never paid attention to preserving It's movies from the old days. Half of all the movies made in Hollywood and around the world are gone forever, because in the early days they were just considered disposable. And the Spanish Dracula was missing one reel. There was the negative was at the Library of Congress, but one of the reels had completely disintegrated, and it was thought to be unrestorable. And I was just so fascinated, I wasn't willing to settle for that. So I tracked down a complete print of the Spanish Dracula at the Cuban Film Archives, the Cinemateca de Cuba. And I got myself a special visa and went down there and watched it and made frame enlargements from it. And I put it all in my book. And Universal looked at it and said, oh, maybe we can do something with this. And they restored it. And it became one of their biggest selling home videos for the Spanish-speaking market, which, of course, is very large, still for the studios. And so for the last couple of decades of Lupita's life, she lived to be 106 and just passed away a few years ago. And I had the great fortune of being able to accompany her to film festivals and special screenings of the film. And I did a little documentary for the Universal DVD and Blu-ray of Dracula, and you can see her talking about the films there. Just an amazing woman. By the end of her life, she could speak 5 languages fluently. And she knew everybody in Hollywood, since the 1930s. And it was a shame. I was one of the first people who approached these people who were involved in those old horror movies, because most of them died without ever having given an interview. There was no career retrospectives, no oral history, nothing like that. But I did find a few people like Lupita and others who are on the dedication page of Hollywood Gothic. And I hope future generations will not make this same mistake, because movies are just this is our primary form of storytelling. This is our legacy, and the more we know about the history, the better. And so I hope people are paying more attention to getting these people's memories, on paper. But now they are basically all gone. There's nobody to talk to anymore. These classic horror movies are at the very limits, beyond the limits of living human memory. So it makes a case not just for preserving the films, but preserving the memories of people who were involved in making them.
Abordamos ya la absoluta evolución, mistificaciones y metamorfosis del vampiro, desde la novela hasta el penúltimo vampiro que hayamos visto en el cine, en las plataformas. El conde de Stoker no llevaba, lógicamente, smoking, no era atractivo, no era fascinante. Luego, algo que sí sirvió, como todos sabemos, o sí tuvo en cuenta Murnau en Nosferatu. En estos momentos el vampiro puede ser cualquier cosa, estrella de rock, personaje fascinante, incluso en la de Coppola puede ir al cine y ver Amanecer, tenemos las entrevistas. ¿Por qué es tan... ¿Cuál es su evolución? ¿Por qué ha evolucionado también? ¿Por qué usted, David, lo relaciona con el político? ¿Cuál es su seducción? ¿Cuál es su fatalidad?
Sure. Before Dracula, there had been a tradition of the romantic vampire in English literature and in European, in the arts in Europe, the opera especially. But Stoker turned his back on all that. He was more interested in science. He was more interested in Darwin's theories, the idea of evolutionary regression. So his Dracula was not a romantic character at all, although he became one later. He was a horrible old man who grew younger as he drank blood, but he never became attractive. He never seduced anyone. And Stoker thought that his employer, Stoker was a theater manager. He worked for 30 years for the great English stage actor and first knighted actor, Henry Irving. And he thought that Dracula would be a good part for his employer to play on stage. But he was badly mistaken because his Dracula had none of these attractive qualities. And in the novel, he's off stage. And that's not what a big star wants to, portray on the stage and later in the movies. So as much as he wanted to see Dracula dramatized, he never was able to see it done during his lifetime. But in the early 20th century, it was successfully adapted to the stage, but it had to be completely rethought. The character of Dracula had to be the kind of character who could come onto the stage and interact with other characters. And it had to follow the conventions in the theater of the drawing room mystery melodrama, which was very popular in the 1920s. And so Dracula could no longer be this creature of the shadows. He had to be presentable. And so that is where we got the idea of the formal clothes, the white tie and tails, the impeccable manners, and all the things that we associate with, Bela Lugosi. Bram Stoker wouldn't recognize Bela Lugosi as having anything to do with his vampire. It certainly confused me as a kid because I was looking at all the pictures in the monster magazines of Lugosi, and then I got a copy of the book and read it, and it said, no, what's going on here? Dracula is very adaptable. That's what's going on here. And the vampire has become this all one-size-fits-all metaphor for almost anything that's unbalanced or exploitative about human relationships. And so you can really find almost any kind of vampire you want these days. And no one has still gone back and done a version of Dracula the way Bram Stoker wrote it. There have been some good adaptations in terms of the plot. The one that the BBC did with Louis Jourdan is the closest we have come to it. But Dracula is Louis Jourdan. He is a romantic screen icon. Again, somebody Bram Stoker wouldn't recognize. Maybe somebody would, but the reason it hasn't been done, I think, is because it's not what audiences want. Stoker said he wrote Dracula just to make money. He didn't. He wasn't trying to make any point beyond telling a good story. And in order to survive in the cinema, in modern media and entertainment, Dracula simply had to adapt to the times. And the original book is always there if you want to go back and see it. So I used to complain that, Stoker was never done right by. And I don't feel that way anymore, because Dracula is immortal because he can adapt, he can change, he can be all things to all people, which is why I frequently say that Dracula is the perfect politician. He knows how to give you what you want, and he's been doing that to all of us for well over 100 years now, and there's no he's into his third century now. He was a product of the 1800s and went through the 1900s and now the 2000s. A span of 3 centuries is quite amazing for any kind of imaginary being. But Dracula shows no signs of slowing down, and I think he'll keep playing us off ourselves as long as people are watching movies or writing books or having nightmares.
Yo creo que enseguida abriremos los micrófonos para vosotros, para el público, pero dado que el cartel y las criaturas que nos han acompañado, nos están acompañando durante esta semana son las brujas, algo que decir, ya sé que mucho. ¿Alguna reflexión, David, sobre la bruja, la brujería, los brujos, los hechiceros?
Yes. In the European tradition of folklore, there wasn't much. There weren't clear dividing lines between a lot of these fantastic creatures. The witch and the vampire and the werewolf all kind of blended into each other. If you read the folkloric accounts, and this is why folklore is just so rich and interesting, because the monsters tend to blend into one another. The supernatural beings tend to. It's all one continuum, and just certain aspects are accentuated. In the monster show, I talk about our monster icons as being like dream carvings on a carousel of the imagination, and the faster the carousel turns, the more one monster tends to look like another. And the witch is probably one of the oldest supernatural icons. The ghost and the witch, the thing that comes back from the grave, and the human being who has the power to influence such things. And you can't really completely understand one without understanding all of them. So anything I can do to encourage you to learn more about your favorite witch or ghost or vampire or freak, please go for it. You'll be a better person because of it.
Ondo iruditzen bazaizue, ondo iruditzen baldin bazaizu, David, pasako diogu hitza hor dauden guztiei.
Absolutely.
Tenéis la palabra, ya sabéis que necesitamos esperar a que os den el micrófono para que todo funcione en streaming. ¿Quién quiere primero? Tú. Vale. Directamente.
Vale, gracias. Pues yo quería preguntar, o tengo curiosidad por saber si puede hacer una reflexión sobre sobre por qué nos gusta tanto. Es quizá una pregunta típica a los fans del terror de por qué nos gusta tanto el género del terror, porque nos divierte, ¿no? Nos da miedo y nos divierte a la vez. Esa dualidad, por decirlo así, ¿qué es lo que tiene? Y luego voy a aprovechar y quería preguntar sobre un monstruo concreto que le haya dado miedo siempre, de verdad. Miedo real. Gracias.
Okay. Yeah, we have a very complicated relationship with our monsters. They engage us on so many levels, and it depends on our age, our life experience. Monsters meant something a little different to people who grew up in the Great Depression than they did to us monster kids from the 1960s, or to kids who grew up with slasher movies. But I think they're all kind of transgressive in that they break rules. I think maybe that's the thing that holds it all together. And if we feel a little rebellious, there's probably a monster, that is very well suited, to us. My favorite, just given all the things I've published, obviously is Dracula and vampires. And I think that's because when I was a kid, it was mostly boys at that time. Now there are many young women who are, equally interested in monsters, but it was basically a boy thing, at that time. And boys would pick their favorite monster, and you could see the reasons. They were the Frankenstein monster and his stumbling discomfort with dealing with women, especially. Remember what happened with the bride there. The werewolf having to do with hair and emotions and hormones and anger and keeping all of that in check. It's obvious why teenage boys could identify with some of these monsters. I gravitated to Dracula, and I think it was because Dracula was in control of everything at a time where it felt to me that, even though I repressed the memory of this, that the world was about to explode and nobody could do anything about it. But Dracula was in complete control of everything. He could stare down the atomic bomb if he had to, and I'm certain that was the reason that drew me to that particular image. And I can't believe that 60 years later I'm still writing about it and trying to explain it to people. But monsters have been pretty good to me. They're not always. I mean, I've written about a lot of the people who became obsessed with Dracula and thought they could make money on it, or they identified with the power and the control and things like that, and who ended kind of badly. I mean, Bela Lugosi is just one of the great tragedies of Hollywood, in that he became so identified with the part that his career in Hollywood went nowhere. He was a very good actor, but people couldn't, producers and audiences, they looked at that face. It was his face. They heard that voice. It was his voice. No makeup, involved. And they wouldn't let him do anything else. And he's sometimes, compared to Marilyn Monroe in the same kind of tragic way. A talented performer who could not get out of the typecasting. But there have been many other people, all the people who were involved in putting together the stage play and the movies. Bram Stoker's widow, who she did succeed. She fought long and hard to to make some money from Dracula, and he finally was good to her. He isn't good to everybody. There's kind of a curse associated with him. I fortunately don't seem to have fallen on his bad side, but I don't test him that much. Yes.
Hola.
Hi.
Todd Browning es muy importante en tu bibliografía. Me gustaría saber si en los procesos de documentación se ha producido alguna anécdota que te haya llamado la atención a ti personalmente. Y por otra parte, de lo que es la filmografía de Todd Browning, ¿hay alguna película, esa joya oculta que haya que reivindicar un poco? Gracias.
Yes. In terms of the hidden jewels, I was able to convince my video company, Criterion, to bring out, they wanted to bring out Freaks in a brand new edition. And so I was very involved in all of that. But there was one film that, of Browning's, that hardly anybody had seen. It was called The Mystic, and it came out in 1925, right at the beginning of his career at MGM. And it is a story about fake spiritualists who penetrate high society. And it is the sensibility of the carnival, of the con artist, the trickster, all of these things that, it goes all through Todd Browning's movies. This one is particularly good, and especially because it absolutely anticipates the plot of the classic Nightmare Alley, which, if Browning hadn't retired, it would have been the ultimate movie for him to have made. And I think that William Lindsay Gresham, who wrote the novel Nightmare Alley, saw The Mystic as a teenager in New York. When he was involved he was working in Coney Island at the time, and he could have gone to any movie theater and seen this. But I think that's a connection that Guillermo del Toro, in his remake of Nightmare Alley, it's as much of a homage to Todd Browning and Freaks as it is to Gresham and Tyrone Power and the original classic film. So I was just so happy when I got them to agree to include that. So it has newly restored Freaks, The Unknown, with Chaney and Joan Crawford in one of her early roles. 10 minutes nobody's seen before, for the first time on home video, and the first ever release of the Mystic. And they did a wonderful job. I wish I could have done more. They didn't give me all that much time to work on it, but it's a boxed set. It's called Todd Browning's Sideshow Shockers: Freaks, The Unknown, and The Mystic. Thank
you. Hi, thanks for being here, sharing all this information with us. My question is related with what she asked you before. It was about the example of Megan, that she's an evolve, or she's an extension of the Bride of Chucky. Why do you think that the new monsters, the monsters movie that we have nowadays, they don't become iconic, such as Dracula, such as Creature from the Black Lagoon and everything? Why they don't become an icon, And I have another question, if I may. What do you think about the last Voyage of the Demeter? I don't know if you saw that movie. It's André Overdral's new movie about Dracula.
I haven't seen that film yet, only because there are so many films I am supposed to watch and don't get around to, but it's going to be streaming very soon, and I'm looking forward to it. That's the problem with there are so many horror movies today. It used to be, this kind of discrete category, and it wasn't a problem to keep up to date on it. But it's hard enough just to keep up with vampire films. There are just too many. I thought of putting together an encyclopedia of movies, and suddenly I realized every year it's out of date. There are more good movies being made than there are places to distribute them. I mean, you have to kind of line up or go to film festivals, and many of the things you see at these festivals you will end up never seeing on home video. So they're wonderful to attend. I think that Chucky and Megan are both they're descendants of they're in the Frankenstein line, the monsters of science and technology, and so they can be traced back. They're not new icons, although there's something uncanny about the doll or the effigy, but primarily they are the children and grandchildren of the Frankenstein monster.
Hi. Two questions also. My first question is regarding zombies. I just don't understand this craze about zombies, maybe over the last decade, maybe longer. And maybe you answered it because you said world problems of destruction and nuclear war maybe cause people to think about death, and that's why so many shows about zombies have come out. I hate zombie movies. I don't understand why there's so many of them. That's my first question. And then my second question is, you said that Dracula to you was a person of control, but yet Dracula is known for being, addicted to a substance, which I think a large percent of the world can relate to now as well. And do you think that is a reason some people relate to Dracula, just because what he goes through with his addiction to blood?
Yeah, the vampire as a metaphor for addiction is really very well established, and it started, I think, back in the with Universal. John Carradine as Dracula was the first vampire to go into rehab to try to, or actually Dracula's daughter was the first. She went to a psychiatrist to try to help her change, and of course it didn't work. And why would us audiences want it to work? I mean, we like the idea of a vampire. The zombie, of course, is closely related to the vampire. It is a creature who comes back from the dead with a transmissible, condition. But I think in America, it just seems so obvious in our gun-saturated culture and the demonization of, dehumanization of people we don't like or don't understand, otherness and guns. I mean, it's America today. I mean, I'm writing about this in a new book about politics and horror, but we've had our warning about guns and demonized others for quite some time, and nobody's been paying much attention. But it's been right there for all of us to behold.
Thank you. I would like just continuing with Dracula, which is
Sure.
one of your favorite.
Why
I would
not?
like to know your opinion about this character during the 70s, Blackula, related to the Black Power movement and
Well, it's
this relation with the communities.
It's being remade. They're making a new version of Blackula now, and we'll find out more about that soon. Yeah, it was part of it was an offshoot of the blaxploitation, genre in Hollywood. It's a bit of a spoof. You know, it's not a serious movie about racial themes really at all. But William Marshall as Blackula is just he was a fabulous Shakespearean actor, very well trained, and he brought both blackness and this theatrical gravitas to the part that hasn't really been equaled. There haven't been that many black vampires either, but he's it's a film that's getting more recognition today. It was just given a special award. The director was given a special award in Hollywood just this past month, and I'm sure we will be seeing more of him. I don't know if they've done a special restored Blu-ray edition, and if it's not out yet, it certainly will be soon. And it's a lot of fun. I mean, I don't think you can read a lot of cultural criticism into it, except to kind of accept it for the fun it's having with itself, and that's a reason enough to go see it.
And I had a second question, if I may. Monsters, the connection or maybe the disconnection of monsters from the Oriental cultures with the Occidental monsters. What do you think about this? Is there a connection?
In modern times, yes, just because cinema is, totally accessible everywhere. So you do have these cross fertilizations going on. But going back, pre-cinema, they're very, very different. I mean, every culture has got its variation on the idea of the revenant, the creature that comes back from the dead and takes the energy from the living. And Bram Stoker, codified a lot of what that did the best job of kind of codifying what a vampire is for the rest of the world. But if you go back into Japanese and Korean folklore, for instance, their vampires bear very little resemblance to anything we see today. And most of the films made in that part of the world tend to draw on Hollywood or England with Hammer Films and that kind of thing. I would like to see some adaptations of the original Asian folkloric monsters. It's a very rich area. I mean, there's not that there aren't too many horror movies being made already. There's more than anybody can keep up with. I certainly can't. But I think that there's a great opportunity for the right filmmaker to get involved with those films. Maybe use many of the traditions in one film, but somebody's interested and somebody will do it at some point. I hope I'm around to see it.
Pues quería preguntarte acerca de los cómics de terror, que fue la fuente de muchos clubs de fans, algunos de ellos no oficiales, y estos cómics pues también sufrieron la censura, los códigos de censura. Gracias.
Oh, there we go. Back in the 1950s, horror comic books in particular became a scapegoat, a political scapegoat for anything that was wrong with the culture, especially crime and juvenile delinquency. And those comics are still some of the best examples of, they were hard to get because I was in the 60s and they were in the 50s. So when I was a kid, they were hard to find, but they were obviously something really special because they were so gruesome. And even the modern adaptations, like the TV series Tales from the Crypt, which drew on these 1950s comic books, pull a lot of punches. You know, the originals are still just extraordinarily inspired and marvelous. But I don't think they caused any perceptible degree of juvenile delinquency or crime. You know, it's they were a very easy kind of scapegoat because terrible things were happening on the pages of comic books. Somehow that was translating into the real world, and it just doesn't work that way. They were reflecting, you know, trends in the society and attitudes in the society, and it's just like all of the complaints and crackdowns on video games, and we see this over and over and over and over, and it gets kind of tiresome when people start looking for scapegoats and blaming creative works of the imagination for things in the real world. They've got it absolutely backwards.
Hola, gracias. ¿Por qué crees que Estados Unidos solo puede consumir cine hecho por ellos mismos? Quiero decir, ¿qué tal se ve, o qué tal ve usted, el cine de habla no inglesa? De este género, claro. ¿Es un tema solo de traducción o que ellos tienen que hacerlo a su forma porque ellos van a entenderlo de otra manera? No sé, me parece curioso.
I think that situation's changing because if you look at Netflix, for instance, there are just huge numbers of foreign language horror films that I had never heard of before, and sometimes they're beautifully dubbed, otherwise they're with subtitles. But I agree that there's only so many distribution channels for these films, and I think filmmakers are attracted to horror all around the world because it has traditionally been a good bet. It was a way to, that's why so many important filmmakers started out making horror films, low-budget horror films, because it was a pretty guaranteed path to some kind of success. But I was several years ago, I was a juror at the Sitges festival, and it was extraordinary. I mean, 2 weeks of just amazing films from all over the world, and hardly any of them I've seen back in the States. And I had a number of favorites, and I keep waiting for them to come. What I'm going to do is go to some of your video stores here. Some of the Spanish films were really extraordinary. There was one that I just loved. It was called To Kill God. And nowhere in America can I find it. And I told people about it, and Jupiter's Moon, which we voted Best Picture the year I was there, finally came out in America. But it's a problem. But I do have a region-free Blu-ray player, and I use my trips to Europe to stock up on a lot of things. And hopefully I have, I'm in a position to talk them up, and people will will listen to me, maybe.
Si queréis lo dejamos con una última pregunta mía, si nos importa, ya sabéis que luego seguiremos hablando por ahí, aunque yo seguiremos hablando de mí. Ai, bazkaida zuen. Hori, nahi baduzue hemen utziko dugu, jakinaren gainean izan da, jarraituko dugu laizketan, atarian edo kanpoan naiz eta euria egin. Eso, que vamos terminando, que quiero hacer una última pregunta, que ya sabéis que mientras caminamos hacia otros sitios seguiremos hablando con David. David, galdetu nahiko nizuke, ¿hacia dónde te están llevando tus estudios, tus investigaciones? ¿Qué nuevos caminos estás, por tu placer y por tu trabajo, intuyendo o explorando?
Well, the book I'm working on right now is all about American politics and horror. It's called I Hear America Screaming. And so it's a little different because it's not, it's talking about the absolute present. And it's hard to keep up with it. I mean, I started writing it in the middle of the Trump administration, and it just seemed like every week there was some new, fresh, horrible thing to consider. And so I'm finally finishing it up, and I'm not sure I've got a lot more to say about the horror genre. Although I'm not going to stop writing books. I started out as a novelist, and I have many unfinished novels and ideas for new ones. And I think, the latter part of my career is probably going to be taken up with my own, my own storytelling and not interpreting the storytelling of others. But it's a... I don't think the 21st century is going to be any kind of picnic for the human race. I mean, starting with climate change and authoritarianism and fascism all over the world, and it is not good. It is just, in some ways, I'm glad I'm not going to be here for the second half of the 21st century. So I don't, finally know, are my books supposed to be a warning to people? Not many human beings want to be warned. I think that's, kind of a horrible truth I'm coming to toward the end of my own life. People don't learn, and there are just cycles of repetition and I don't know. I get very pessimistic at times, and then I go out and do things that don't have anything to do with movies or horror or the coming apocalypse. I like to bake bread. I like to garden. I like my pets, and so I don't know. People, not everybody likes my books. There are a lot of fans who think I take all of the fun out of horror movies and monsters, and that I see everything having to do with sex. I probably do. That's probably a fair criticism, but for me, the deeper you understand something, the more interesting it is. And so I don't understand why people put up a barrier to, a deeper appreciation and just not going beyond the absolute superficial level of things. I was curious. I didn't know where these movies came from. By the time I started writing my books, I had worked in the professional theater for a long time, and I knew that whatever gets put up on stage or on the screen, there was an interesting backstory and personalities, and there was so much more going on than what was apparent. And that's what I tried to do with my books, and I guess no one had ever approached it in the same way. So there it is. This book has been in print for 30 years now. This is the 30th anniversary edition of it. It has never been out of print. It's in print in about 7 languages right now. And I'm proud I made this little contribution. And thank you all for being here. And you give me excuses to come to Europe, and especially Spain, which I really, really like. But thank you for having me here.
Mila esker, gurekin izateagatik, jaso dugu zure abisua, ya estamos avisados de que el siglo XXI no va a ser un picnic. Vayan en compañía de lobos, de vampiros y de gente como usted y como nuestros amigos, resistiremos. Mila esker, hemen izateagatik.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.